Welcome to the Heart of Giving. As you know, each one of these programs brings to you programs and organizations in town that are doing wonderful things for our citizens. And they're done by volunteers. They're done by people who love what they do. Today is no different than any of the other days. We have a group that has been in our community for years and years. It's changed its name, but it's still doing the same wonderful things. And it is the California Conference for Equality and Justice. And I remember the old name and I kind of get it mixed up sometimes. But we're so pleased today to have the president, Wendy Nichols Julian, JD. She is the president, and there is a citizens board, and the chair of the citizens board is Minnie Douglas. And I'm so pleased that the two of you are here because your organization has been in the community for years and years and years. And I want you to tell me, and it was the Conference of Christians and Jews. Now you need to tell me about that and the changeover, and then we'll get to the wonderful programs that you're doing, but a little about the history.
Of course. So you're right. It was originally called the National Conference for Christians and Jews, NCCJ, founded in the 1920s in New York. And the Long Beach chapter was founded 51 years ago in 1963.
Oh, is that right?
Yes. So it was founded by a group of really extraordinary citizens, both clergy and lay people, who came together around the mission, which is to eliminate bias, bigotry, and racism. In 2005, the national organization ceased to exist, and the 65 affiliates had to either sink or swim. And because of the extraordinary board of directors and the donors and the people who believed in the work that we had done over the years, the Long Beach chapter was able to survive and change its name.
So it's not on the it's not on the national level.
No
now.
longer national. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we have a national affiliation that's called the NFJC, the National Federation of Just Communities, but it's just an association for us to continue to share our work. But since 2005, we've been just a local organization in the state of California.
And did all of the others that continued change their names?
Well, only I think about 20 survived right away, and I think now there are more like 35 chapters nationally of the former NCCJ affiliates, and we continue to talk to them on a monthly basis, and we have national conferences. But we took over the work of Orange County and Los Angeles in 2005, and have since been serving the whole Los Angeles, greater Los Angeles area.
From the Long Beach area?
Yes.
Is that right? Well, it's much more extensive than what I thought. That's now tell me the original statement of the goal.
Sure. So the mission statement is to eliminate bias, bigotry, and racism.
Wow.
That's simple. And we had a wonderful board retreat. We've had 2 retreats over the last 2 years in which we've refined that statement a bit to explain how we do that work, which is through education, conflict resolution, and advocacy.
Well, it seems as though that this organization in its history started something when it was not probably a popular thing to do, or people didn't talk about this that much.
Right.
And now it's
yes. Well, the original organization was started when Al Smith was running for president, and he was a Catholic, and there was a lot of public vitriol and horrible communication, anti-Catholic communication in the public. And so a group of priests and rabbis and pastors and lay people got together to say that went against the fundamental understanding of what American values were, and that they wanted to live in a community where people could come together with their differences and live in peace and justice. So that was the original foundation of the organization, and in some ways that hasn't changed much in many years.
I was a member of the board, and I think it was in the 70s, and I think that there were 2 women on it, and they'd all been men before that, so even that, there had been not a bias, but it just was not as acceptable as it is now.
But it has changed now.
Oh, absolutely.
We have quite a few female. The board is very diverse. It's reflective of the community.
Oh, yes.
And so,
yes, I know.
Yeah.
So, and the activities that started all of this, can you think of the first activities that
The
You
first
had-
activities that started, as is often told by June Lensner when he
Oh,
tells
yes.
his stories.
I think he's been with it since the very beginning.
Right,
I
right.
mean,
He's been involved.
he's the mainstay,
Right.
the rock.
There are a few people still around who've been involved since the beginning. Ken Walker is one of them. Ken McMillan, who was the pastor at
Yes.
a United Methodist pastor. And the first activities that they did were dialogues where they brought together people either at Cal State Long Beach or at Long Beach City College to have dialogues around the racial relations in the community. So they had a dialogue about Cambodian affairs and how the Cambodian population was becoming integrated into the population.
Because that happened really
Right.
in the 80s.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, and then also about issues around immigration and the African American population, and so those community dialogues and the humanitarian awards that we still give were the beginning of the organization in Long Beach.
Well, the things that you do have become so extensive, and I know that as early as maybe 15 years ago, you had activities that became activities as a model for others throughout the United States, I would imagine at the time. So let's talk a little bit about how you do and what process do you use to get your message across?
Well, that's a great way of putting the question, the process that we use. And the basic fundamental idea is that our work is based on relationships. And a lot of times when we say human relations, people don't know what that means. They think it means human resources or that it means diversity training, something that you check the box like sexual harassment training. But it really, our work is about getting people to relate to each other in a very human way. So building relationships that are based on trust and based on understanding, even when there are cultural differences. And that is, it sounds easy, but it's really a difficult thing
Well,
to
it's
do.
inbred in people
It is.
to be the way they are and
Yes.
not even to think about how they feel about this.
Well, the intent is to change people's patterns of communicating so that they're communicating at a level that they're all understanding and working for a goal.
That's what they're having problems with bullying.
Yes.
Just with that, let alone for racial reasons. Well, but what are the activities you do to do this?
So what the mission statement says is education, conflict resolution, and advocacy. So our programs all fall under those categories. And in the education, that's where we do most of the work. So we do education mostly with youth. That's our biggest audience. So we serve all the high schools in Long Beach and many high schools around Los Angeles. And we provide them with human relations training, which is the opportunity for youth to sit together either up in the mountains at Building Bridges Camp or in their own classrooms in our Talking in Class program. And they talk about stereotypes and discrimination and how they themselves have been hurt by labeling or by bullying and what they can do to become leaders and serve their community to become more inclusive and more just.
Is there a leader of this group?
Well, we have a staff leader, who's Daniel Solis is his name. He coordinates our youth human relations educations, but we have about 200 volunteers, many of whom are graduates of the program from years ago and who come back and they serve as facilitators. We train them as facilitators. They take these kids up to the mountains. They'll spend 3 days with the youth up in the mountains and as volunteers. So it's an organic process by which students who go through the camps then become the youth leaders who then become adult staff and sometimes then become staff of the organization.
But you know, it's like saying we teach them to read, and then but you have to. How do you teach them to read? And the thing that comes to mind is that what you're talking about are very sensitive because it's the way you feel, and you're not sure how other people feel, and you don't really know how the reaction is, what the reaction is to how you're feeling. How do you get them to that point?
Well, so we do a little bit of academic teaching. So there's a cognitive model around feelings and emotions, which are stereotypes, and then thoughts, which are prejudices, and actions, which are discrimination. So we teach about how I can have a feeling and then stop it before it becomes an action. So I may have a lot of stereotypes that are built into me by my parents and my church or my temple or my
That you don't
school
even know are not right.
that I don't even know are not right. but that I have a choice to stop that stereotype before it becomes a hateful word or an action to hire someone or not to hire someone.
Do you have an example?
Sure. So, for example, a lot of times we talk about hiring practices where discrimination is really painful and causes oppression in many ways. And so it may be that that I find that I have something in common with someone that I'm interviewing, and that makes me feel like I like them more because I know that I have something in common in that might build trust. So it would mean that I would acknowledge the stereotype. So I have the stereotype that maybe someone who went to college the way where I went to college, or who looks like my son, or who has a hobby that's similar to my cousin, that I will make a specific action to go back to the job requirements and think about, well, why am I feeling this way? And am I making this decision based on facts, or am I making it based on feelings and emotions that are stereotypes? So it's an awareness of helping to move beyond where some of those stereotypes lead to discrimination.
Well, that's an example of in an event or for a reason, but for someone to say, it hurts me when I hear such and such,
Right.
those are the things that it seems like would be hard for them to say unless the climate is really
That's
right.
right.
And that's how do they get to that point?
So that is the crux of what we train our facilitators in, is creating a safe environment for dialogue and communication. And we work for sometimes hours in our programs to build that trust. So we have, for example, communication guidelines that we everybody in the group has to say they'll agree to before we'll go forward with a dialogue. Things like speak from your heart, only one person speaks at a time, confidentiality, those types of guidelines. And then up in the mountains, it's a lot easier because we have them in a safe environment away from home. And it's incredible how quickly some of the youth will be able to tell their personal stories around their feelings of being discriminated against.
And do you start it with maybe an activity where everybody's in a team and they have to kind of depend on each other for throwing the ball or something, so that they
Sure.
kind of like each other
Yes.
as people, or
Right.
see that their reaction as people?
We do icebreakers, lots of icebreakers. We have an activity up at camp called the Lemon Auction, where youth get to participate in what they think is a game that they try to win, but it turns out that there's actually a big lesson at the end around cooperation. We do things like have them talk about their personality and communication styles as they relate to animals. So you have to choose whether you're more like a buffalo or more like a deer, and then they do hand signals and form these groups and then talk about, where do I get those personality styles or communication styles, and is it okay for me as a woman to be outspoken like a buffalo, or am I expected to be more like a deer, or is that a cultural component? And then they're able to use those examples as ways to break the ice and get into the deeper discussion.
And excuse me.
Many of the team members are prior attendees, and they go back as leaders, and then the other students are able to see they went through this, so it's not as difficult as I may think that it might be. So there is a certain identification with another person who has experienced some of the same things that I've experienced.
So they not only know how to accept people in the group more, but maybe a real learning lesson for their own personalities.
Absolutely.
You know, I sat in a group once that I was facilitating with a young woman from Huntington Park High School who had gone up there, which is 99% Latino, the high school is. And they were at camp with some Long Beach schools, and we had an African-American boy in our group. And at the end, they were giving each other affirmations about how much they appreciated each other. And she looked at him and she said, I need to tell you that I've actually never had a face-to-face conversation with an African-American person before in my life. And it's opened my eyes to all these things that I thought I knew based on these stereotypes, and that actually you're really a lot like me. And that kind of learning is it's not something that comes out of a textbook. You can only do it through face-to-face dialogue, and that's the that's the way we run our programs.
And do you run it through the schools?
Well, we have partnerships with the schools, and the schools have are now being asked. At one point, the schools were funding the programs entirely, and then when the recession hit and schools were forced to cut back, we were at a risk of having to lose all the programs. So a lot of incredible board members stepped up and kept the programs alive, and now we're sort of inching back to a place where it's shared between donations from our donor base and the schools paying part of it. But it really is sort of an extracurricular activity at
But
this
like,
point.
do you take them during a school time or?
The camp is Friday, Saturday, Sunday, so they miss Friday, and
I
then
see.
our talking in class, they actually get pulled out of class to do a special program, and then we do some programs in the summer and on weekends as well.
Like how many people are in a group?
Well, 150 students go up to the mountains five times a year, which is pretty incredible.
And they say it as a big group.
It's a big group,
Oh.
yes, yeah, in Yucaipa and
You learn a lot,
at Pilgrim
100
Pines.
people.
Yes, yes. They're very diverse groups.
And so, but they work as a team and do things together and then have sessions.
Right, so
together?
they split up. They're assigned to a cabin group, so they have a group there that's split boys and girls, so it'll be an all-girl cabin that's diverse. And then they have a dialogue group, which is very diverse. We specifically have some ways that we separate students so that they will make sure there's a good split of students from different racial groups and different genders. And then we split into racial groups, which we call racial affinity groups. So we'll give all the Asian Pacific Islander students a chance to talk with each other about their experiences, and then they come back to the big group and share those experiences back.
Report back.
Right, right.
Well, that's a wonderful program, and I'm so glad that you're still continuing this. But I know you have other things that you do for the community, and let's talk about those.
Well, maybe Minnie, you could talk about the breakfast that's on everybody's
Well,
mind right now.
the interfaith breakfast.
It's coming up.
It's coming up, and originally it was a gift from Jean Linsner. Jean was one of the first donors for that and started. Now we have others. But it's an intent to bring all of the faith-based organization in the city together. And it has been quite successful with the speakers that we've had in the past. And this year, it's an outstanding speaker. And we're pleased because we're venturing into an area that we have not ventured into before. We're having a speaker to speak on mental illness, Kevin Hines. So, and we all know that that is an area that there has not been as much attention paid to as needs to be.
More
Right.
information.
And
Yes.
obviously, race and racism continues to be an important part of our work, and it's the one type of ism that's called out in our mission statement. But there are so many other forms of ways that people are discriminated against based on their ability, or based on their gender, based on their sexual orientation, based on their religion, other things that separate people rather than bring them together. And it's interesting. We're learning a lot in this process and working with new partners, and we're excited about what he's going to bring to the breakfast this year.
Well, and that brings people together.
It does. That is the
and it's always
intent.
well attended. Always
It
well
is.
attended. And other activities?
Sure. So the other big program that we do, which actually now is almost half our work, is in the conflict resolution side. So our program is called Restorative Justice, and it is a conflict resolution program that rebuilds relationships between people. So we have two programs. One is in schools, and the other is in the justice system. So the schools program, everybody knows that there's a lot of conversation going on now about high suspension rates and achievement gaps between Latino and African American students and their white counterparts. And so our program is really focused on training adults in the school system, teachers and administrators and school security officers, to find new ways to manage conflict rather than through punitive discipline programs. So we have some really fantastic programs. There was an article in the New York Times last week about one of our programs in Los Angeles, and it is finding a way to make sure that students stay accountable for what they've done. It's not a slap on the wrist. It's not a lesser punishment. It's a form of really insisting that you take accountability for their actions and stay in school and continue to be on the right path. So that schools program is fully active right now at Reed High School in West Long Beach and Cabrillo, and we're working on building it up at some of the other schools in Long Beach, and we're also working at Santa Monica High School, two high schools in Los Angeles Unified, and and we've been at 2 middle schools as well in Los Angeles Unified.
And how do you do that? I mean,
So
what process do you follow
we
for that?
we
Because-
actually, yeah, it's tough. So we have a full-time coordinator on campus who's one of our staff members who's trained as a
you
circle
mean on
keeper.
what campus? On
So at Reed,
At Reed.
at Cabrillo,
Okay.
at Santa Monica High School campus,
Okay.
at Augustus Hawkins in South LA, at Roosevelt in
and students
Boyle
are
Heights.
recommended to be part of
They
this
are,
process.
right.
Ah.
So maybe there'll be 2 young women who the rumor is they're going to get into a fight after school. So what the dean will be able to do is send them to the restorative justice room so that the trained mediator can work out the problem between them before they get to a point where somebody has to be suspended or arrested. And what's ended up happening is that the teachers who have been trained as well are able to use these methods in their classrooms and find that it just allows for a lot more learning time, less distractions, and builds better respect and relationships in the community. So it's a pretty awesome program.
So a conflict resolution could be a verbal conflict, or it
Yes.
could be a physical conflict, or it could be something that looks like it's leading to it.
Yes.
And one of the components that I appreciate with it is that it focuses on the behavior that has harmed someone else, and not necessarily that you have broken the law or that you have broken a rule, but what behavior have you exhibited that harmed another person, and what can you do to rectify it? So that's kind of the basis of resolving some of those conflicts and taking the accountability for your own behaviors.
In one of the other interviews I've had with organizations that work with the little children, say that they come from conflict homes and don't only know to push or to shove or to holler and not to work something out. So sometimes that's all they know, and so they have to learn a new way of resolving their emotion.
I worked with a young woman in one of these programs on the juvenile justice side. So she had been arrested because she had assaulted a woman, and my first meeting with her response was, well, she said something mean to me and I punched her, and that's just the way I deal with problems. And what was interesting is that through the program, as we met with her before she got face to face with the victim, she really came to the decision that that wasn't the best way to deal with it, because she didn't feel good about it, and also because of the consequences. And so she was able to make a full turnaround and meet face to face with the woman that she had harmed, who fortunately was willing to participate in the process and deeply apologize and take accountability, and then come up with a plan to make it right by the person
Did the
that
other
she
woman
harmed.
say yes, she had said something mean?
Oh, well, she was arrested. She had assaulted her, and she had lacerations on her face. And,
Oh, my. It
So
wasn't
it was
just verbal.
not just verbal. The police were involved, and what happened is that the woman that had been harmed, the victim, was able to turn it around and say, "I'm going to help you." And this young woman had a child herself. She's a 17-year-old with a child, and the woman who was the victim came to the meeting and said, I want to see you turn your life around. And so they came to an agreement that they both signed, where the young woman would get back registered in school. She got a job, and write a formal apology to the woman and the woman's children. And it really became more like a relationship where she was able to find forgiveness and move forward, and then the young woman had another chance without
Yeah.
having to go to.
Forgiveness, that's a big thing.
It's a big thing.
It's effective to the point that we have siblings. One sister or brother may be involved in the program, and they insist that their sibling come into the program. We've had quite a few situations where that has happened.
So now this is a new program in schools.
It's fairly new,
Yes.
about 2 years old.
Yeah, well, I love it that the schools have accepted this so that there is somebody there
Right.
to help with, because it's like a bullying, but it's also, why did you have that type of a reaction?
Right.
And the concern had been when a kid acts up in school, you expel them. They're not learning. So are you really assisting that student to do anything about their behavior? And with this program, they're able to stay in school and not necessarily be expelled and lose good class time.
And I think what's happened is that there's been kind of a wave. So starting with the Columbine and some of the other school shootings,
Oh, yes.
there was obviously a lot of fear and a move towards these zero tolerance policies. But then what happened with the zero tolerance policies is that what zero tolerance means is don't take any factors into consideration. And so a lot of youth who weren't presenting the harm like a Columbine shooter, but were acting out in class, were just thrown out. And they were either thrown out by suspension or otherwise pushed out of schools. And that this is now a movement back to let's add a little bit of humanity into it and
That's great.
get at the problem.
That's great. Well, you know, everyone wants to feel accepted.
Right.
Yes.
That's
And,
for sure.
you know, and you have some reason sometimes why somebody doesn't like that type of
Yes.
person. And these problems are so, you say, easily solved, but they're not.
No.
You have to work on them.
Right.
Well, it's almost time to go, and we haven't mentioned about your big dinner that you have every year,
Right.
where, do you want to say a word about that?
Sure. So this is our 52nd annual Humanitarian Awards Dinner. So it's I'm actually very humbled to be working for this organization. I say this all the time that you know, there are people working in this organization that were working in the heart of the civil rights movement, and I'm really proud to be able to continue that work. And every year we have humanitarians being honored that
That's
have done
wonderful.
extraordinary work. So it'll be May 21st this year, and we've
Very
got
good.
another exciting list of folks.
Well-
That's how I got involved with.
Is that right, Minnie?
Absolutely, I was a humanitarian awardee in
Oh, and you-
2007.
All of a sudden you discovered this wonderful organization.
Mayor
Absolutely.
O'Neill,
Yeah.
of
Yes,
course.
yes,
No,
absolutely. So the good work
That's wonderful.
that was being doing and that was needed in the
Well,
city.
I know that you have a wonderful board, and
Mm-hmm.
I was part of it for a while, and it's just been such an asset to our city. And
Yes. Oh.
people like Jean Linster, who have stayed with it the 50 years,
Mm-hmm.
is to be congratulated. And Jean, I hope you're watching to hear all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So we're so pleased that you've been here today, and we thank you very, very much.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Well, that's gone very fast because you found some wonderful things that are happening, especially with our youth, because the way they are now is the way we probably should have been when we were that age. So thank you very much for being part of this. And I also want to thank Memorial Care in Long Beach. They are the ones that are making this program possible. And they have been such a partner with us, and we thank them so much because what we're hearing affects all of us, and it does affect our health too sometimes. So thank you very much for watching.